Welcome, guys, to the third episode of The Shadow and the Self. Today, we'll be covering not only the patriarchy, but the patriarchy with an actual speaker who has lived the patriarchy in the flesh. She has a very interesting understanding of the patriarchy because she was someone who was very much raised in religion. So, without further ado, welcome, Gabasa. If you don't mind, can you kind of give us just your feedback, how you grew up, and educational/career background?
No problem. Hey, y'all. Thank you so much for having me on the pod today. I'm so excited. And yeah, let's just get into it. So my name is Gabaza. My surname is Diba. I'm a Black South African woman. I live in Johannesburg, and I was born in October of 1990. So this is a couple of months after Nelson Mandela was released from prison. Now, we had our first democratic elections in 1994, but things really started to change in South Africa in the year 1990. So contextually, I'm a post-apartheid baby. And so my history is contextually revolving around living as a quote unquote born free in South Africa. So my grandparents lived through apartheid, racial segregation, dehumanization, and my forefathers lived through, the colonialism that was in South Africa. And so I'm from that line. My parents are from rural areas in the country, but they are educated. And I mean, today you guys can hear my private school accent, right? I went to private schools. And yeah, like I mean, even my dad actually was the first to earn a doctorate in his family, and my mother was a teacher. But they grew up during apartheid, and I the vestiges of that system are rife in the country, and they are still living and ever present, even in my family system. Okay, so I'm the middle of three. I have an older sister and a younger brother. And the first thing I understood from the time I was maybe 5 or 6 was the fact that there was an issue, right? And the issue was that I was a girl. I discovered later what it meant to be Black when I was like 23, 24. Africa, I mean, the demographic words, especially Johannesburg, predominantly Black people live in the city. And so I only discovered that I was Black later on in a very real way, in a political way. But from the time I was a little girl, I understood that the issue was the fact that I was a little girl. And I think what made me come into contact with this information was the fact that every time I protested about why I had to do something or why I couldn't do something, it either revolved around the fact that I was a girl or my brother was a boy. And so the middle child is that, like, my sister has firstborn privilege, right? I mean, she's the firstborn. And then I came 12 years later, and then my brother came a year and a half after me. And so I always felt like it was, wonderful firstborn. Okay, after 12 years, oh, wonderful, another girl. And then a year and a half later, I was like, no, we have a boy now. And that still plays out in my family where, like, my sister gets privileges because she's firstborn. My brother gets privileges because he's a boy. And so I really didn't have any any leg to stand on when it comes to privileges in my family system, because I've got the wrong genitalia and I was born with the wrong gender, right? And so every time I had to do something, I didn't understand why I had to do it. It was like, no, because you're a girl, right? Like, or we don't talk about men's behaviors in our family. We egos. We don't make them feel bad. We cook for them. We eat them. We serve them. We try not to in them. From the time I was like a little girl, I just felt like, wow, there are just people that we live to make our lives revolve around. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And now that I'm older, it's kind of like idolatry, because I think that's what it means to live in a patriarchal society. Is that, like, we idolize men. We have pedestals them, right? Become these figures who are never held accountable for any behavior by virtue of, the appendages between their legs. And I found that preposterous growing up, that, like, what do you mean that I have to, like, cook all the time, and my
Mm,
brother doesn't have to because he's a boy. It just didn't make sense to me. But that's
mhm.
the family that I'm coming from, because my family is quite patriarchal.
Okay.
Um, that's
Mhm,
kind of my history, I think. And I was raised, obviously, like you said, in
mhm,
a Christian home. So I went to church. We went to church every Sunday.
mhm,
I went to Sunday school. I was confirmed at 17.
mhm,
Um, I became a Christian at 19 because I
mhm,
had a supernatural experience. So I believe that Jesus Christ is God. So my life has, I feel like I've lived two lives. And you
mm,
can imagine, right? Like
mhm,
I'm a South African. I'm an African who is a Christian. I am
mhm,
very aware of what that means, right? That like
mhm,
a lot of Black people don't understand other Black people who are Christians, right? And that makes sense because of our history. But what
mhm,
I'm saying is that I've lived two lives, because I lived a life where I didn't understand my faith, and now
mhm,
I'm living a life where I understand my faith. And so the Bible, as like as a historical document,
mhm,
is replete with stories, themes, narratives, and explanations about why the world that we live in looks the way that it does. And I think even explanations around patriarchy are
mhm.
quite um, are quite revealing. I mean, it's just there, you know. So that's yeah, that's kind of
That's
me in
mhm.
a
Okay.
nutshell.
Yeah, and I think that's very fascinating because I think really okay, can you even like walk us through because a little bit of the apartheid is very interesting to me because I my understanding is that patriarchy was spread throughout the globe through European conquests. So, you
Mm-hmm.
know what I mean, and they brought that into like, you know, all the places that they colonized sadly. It's very interesting to me like because do have people who are also, you know, from the African continent and they also share very similar experience with how the patriarchy is so entrenched in Africa. I have a curiosity because I also have understanding that Africa before all that was a very spiritual, you know, continent. Why, like right now, how would you describe like most? Do you feel like most people fall into Christian beliefs, or like what is the main, you know, otherworldly beliefs in like the area that you're in, which would be South Africa?
Okay, so on paper, South
Mm-hmm.
Africa is a Christian country. Most people, I believe, are still heavily conservative,
Mm-hmm.
and there's another word I was looking for. Yeah, conservative. Um, our parents' generation, our grandparents, even though we have social media, and I think a lot of religious mores that people used to follow before 1994 are still there in our thinking, but no one really practices that. I'm talking about my generation now, those of us who are in our 30s. But South Africa, by and large, on paper, is a Christian country. Most Black people, especially, still go to church, still believe in Jesus. And even if they don't, like, church is just the thing in my country, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, Side of that, a lot of South Africans practice African spirituality.
Mm-hmm.
So um, we have um, we have sangoma, or we have traditional healers. So these are people who connect with their ancestors and people who have rejected Christianity and
Mm-hmm.
gone. So with social media in our country right now,
Mm-hmm.
a conversations have been happening for years now about what it means to be African and to be Christian. Some people have African spirituality and converted to Christianity. Some
Okay.
people have Christianity and have gone back into African spirituality. Some people do both. Some people, you know what I mean? So there's a lot of conversation happening around that. But I think on paper, South Africa is still, on a Christian country.
Okay. And my
Yeah.
curiosity is that too, because I feel like with a lot of religions, you know, I feel like a lot of men use that as like a way for them to like almost like, you know, back up that, you know, patriarchy makes sense. Where do you think men get wrong about like religion and how they use it in order to back their own agenda?
It's funny. I was talking about this with someone today.
Mm-hmm.
And I did a TikTok about this a couple of weeks ago, because I've been starting to question
Mm-hmm.
what men that churches in particular are producing, because the masculinity that is
Mm-hmm.
presented in the Bible is very different from African traditional masculinity.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and there's a major disjuncture there that makes me very uncomfortable, because you have to ask yourself, if we have, as Christians, for instance, the figure of Jesus Christ as a perfectly human and divine figure,
Mm-hmm.
um, we also have a masculine figure. And when you look at the Gospels, you look at the stories about who Jesus was, his type of masculinity is not the type and the kind that African men enact or embody, right? And, and it's crazy because I'm a Black girl. My church is predominantly it's filled with Black people, and I'm in the Orthodox church, right? I'm in the Anglican church. I'm non-denominational as a Christian, but I like Anglicanism. I think, I like the pageantry. I love hymns. I love the solemnity. I just really love that vibe. It's kind of like my vibe.
Right.
But like I go to church with Black people, and the men in church, like we go to church together, but their masculinity is still African. And the reason it's the craziest thing, because I'm like, no, we're supposed to be emulating the type of masculinity that Jesus gave us as a model, because Jesus is a figure. He's a model for what it means to be a human being in general. He's a wonderful model for masculinity in particular, because is right. And that's why Jesus came as a man, is because God has put the responsibility of salvation, and even of salvation squarely on men's shoulders, because that's God's design. Now the question is, why don't men who purport or say that they believe in Jesus look like Jesus? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think they reject that masculinity, because Jesus's masculinity requires for those who want to be seen as leaders and authorities to actually condescend and serve others first. Which to the minds of African men is a woman thing, right? Because in our culture, women are caregivers. They are the ones who must bow down and submit. They are the ones who must abandon themselves to ensure the well-being of everyone. They are the ones who should enact a systemic and, I mean, a perpetual martyrdom, and then what we do to bolster that sense of that demand of martyrdom is that we glorify it, right? In settings, women are praised. They are glorified for being martyrs. Her husband put her through so much. You know what I mean? But she's still there. She still takes care of the children. She still comes to church. She's participating in the church, even though everyone knows what she's going through in her marriage, and that extends to not only women in the church, but Black women in general. And so I think that's why they reject that type of masculinity, because it goes against their very conditioning. So what you find in church is that most men are just coming, I think, for vibes. I must say. I mean, I don't know what else they're coming for, because
I made free food.
no, I think it's for vibes, because the more I read my scripture, the more I study the scripture, I'm like, we're supposed to look so different than we do right now, because Jesus said, I did not come to be served, but to serve, and those of you who will be the greatest in the kingdom have to be the least, because his model is that, and this is the Christian faith, right? That God, the Son of God, leaves heaven and eternity and condescends to humanity, lives a human life as a means of saving others. And so the element and the quality of being self-sacrificial is intrinsic to true Orthodox Christianity. And the demand is placed on men to emulate, embody that exact kind of character that Jesus embodies in the Bible, and as he is even today, because we believe he's alive. But I think African men, like I said, they reject it because it goes against their conditioning that by virtue of being men, they deserve to be praised, worshipped, and not held accountable for what they do by virtue of being men.
No, and I think that's the problem with what I said. Like, men try to use like religion as like a cop out so that they feel like they have are worthy of that level of revere. I think men don't actually want to, nor do they put in the work to actually gain that divinity that's real power that I feel like secretly they yearn, if that makes any sense. It's almost they just want the rewards, but they don't want to actually put in the work.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's because if men weren't threatened or were truly okay with the way things are in terms of having to share the world with women, they wouldn't behave the way that they do. And so that's why that's why I go back to shame and insecurity, because I'm like, only a person who is filled with shame and insecurity would think it's okay to
Mm-hmm.
believe and even enforce measures that make other people feel inferior to them. That
Right.
is not someone who is well. That is not someone who is, we would say today, regulated or has a very secure sense of self, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I mean,
Mm-hmm.
you'll tell, I don't know, but I feel like if men weren't physically stronger and were unable to enact violence, we wouldn't have the world we have today, because violence is a weapon that men use to keep us in check.
Yeah. I would say it's almost like a temper tantrum. You know, it's like I don't actually want to do that type of work. So in order
Yeah.
so I can still get what I want, I'm going to force it even if I don't deserve it. And it's like what you said, that's the outcome. Because at the end of the day, it's like if you don't, work towards things or you don't do like that stuff that actually is going to lead you to that outcome. And it's almost like it's something that's built on a faulty foundation. It's going to lead to chaos and destruction, kind of like what we're seeing right now.
Oh, 100%. And if I had to take you back to the scripture, right? So like
Mm-hmm.
when God comes looking for Adam,
Mm-hmm.
in and he says, like, Adam, where are you? I think it was time for them to have like their afternoon martini or something, right? Because he was like,
Mm-hmm.
where are you? And Adam says, no, I hid because I was naked. I was naked. And God says, how do you know you were naked? You know what I mean? Like, they didn't know
Mm-hmm.
just the fruit. Did you eat the fruit from the tree that I told you not to eat of? And Adam says, it's that woman that you gave me the fruit to eat. And I think
Mm-hmm.
the first time I was like, what?
Mhm.
He blames God
Mhm.
giving him Eve.
Mhm.
Whereas, a couple of verses prior, he burst out into poetry the first time he saw her.
Mm.
You know, Adam didn't ask for Eve. God made her because, he didn't have a companion on his level to
Okay.
kind of help do what God told him to do. And so when he makes Eve and he presents her to him, he
Mhm.
says, oh gosh, this is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. I mean, he affirms her verbally, right? And he
Mhm.
identifies with her and he brings her into his world, so to speak, right? She's kind of
Mhm.
sucked into his vortex. And the
Mhm.
moment it's time for him to account for what happened,
Mhm.
he blames God and says, God, is that woman that you gave me.
But see, I think that's what's going on. Like that is
That's
applicable to all these men. You know what I mean? I feel like again because of the patriarchy and how they can almost like evade the accountability of like checking themselves or just working on themselves. They always
100%.
project all their ugly like inner feelings, kind of like what you're saying, the shame, the toxicity on women. It's never like I no, this is me. Like I have to sit and process this. It's always like it's even like with the I guess like even the lust and the sexuality component, it's always like that's projected like, oh no, she's tempting me. You know what I mean? It's never like they never want to deal with the fact that perhaps I'm feeling this way and I need to learn how to process this in a healthy way, if that makes any sense.
It makes absolute sense because I think
Hmm.
someone on TikTok say, some people are their egos.
Yeah.
And what it means is it means that
Hmm.
they're able to internalize
Hmm.
impact of their own behavior. And so, narcissistically, people who are unable to look at themselves always have to externalize everything, right? And I think it goes back to the very beginning of time, because even Adam, in that instance, could not
Hmm.
own the fact that he listened to Eve, and not, and by listener, when God said to him, because you've listened to your wife, it
Hmm.
wasn't that he heard her out. It means that she took leadership from him, or she took direction from him, which
Hmm.
the order's not supposed to happen. That's why she was created after, right? Women are supposed
Hmm.
to take divine leadership from men, and men are supposed to take divine leadership from God. I'm talking about the order of things, right? So
Right.
now she ate the fruit, and because he ate the fruit at her hands, the order was reversed. But Adam now chose to, sow fig leaves with his wife, and they
Hmm.
go. Right? And then the moment they're brought to account, he puts the blame on God for
Hmm.
putting her there in the garden with him. And if that is not invasion of accountability, I don't know what is.
Hmm.
I don't know what it is. And I think for me, Adam as a figure is just men in general, right? Like,
Hmm.
is to look at things for what they are. So what do? They blame God, right?
Hmm.
same person that you were praising a few verses ago, Adam, you are blaming now God for
Mm.
putting it there with you. And I think, like I'm saying again with the fig leaves, like it's a major externalization, shame management project
Mm-hmm.
that the patriarchy kind of inculcates men into, right? It says, listen,
Right.
everything that's happening outside of the world has got nothing to do with you, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Suffering, refuse to worship and obey you. So you have
Mm-hmm.
power, violence, and
Mm-hmm.
even psychological warfare as a
Mm-hmm.
means of maintaining power and control. And that's why we look the way that we look. It's because men do not have the capacity
Mm-hmm.
um, look inside. And I mean, you tell me this, especially when it comes to the gendered wars, right? You have
Mm-hmm.
women saying enough is enough, and
Mm-hmm.
men not trying to hear it. Now, you tell me what's harder. Do you think it's harder to get someone who's been overworking to sit down and rest, or to get someone who's never had to do something ever get up and work?
And I think that's the problem, though. I feel like they are almost collectively, almost like being forced to experience that ego death, and that's so uncomfortable. And a lot of them are almost like, fighting it to the last one to not, in their eyes, they think it's like they're putting their head down. You know what I mean?
Mm,
They
mm.
don't like that. They want to feel like there's nothing within them that's wrong, and that the world, like what you're saying, is the one that's incorrect, instead of them like going through that ego death process of being like, no, it was me, I was wrong. But I think, again, the problem with our society, and I feel like the reason the problem got so bad, is that men are just naturally built from a survival perspective to live more so in their ego. And I think we as a society have built a culture where we almost like make that times 100, because we never ever, even when they're little boys, held them accountable towards anything. That at that point, when they're grown adults, it's like the problem is so far gone. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think this is where even women come into the picture, right? Because
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think women are actually very guilty. It's
oh,
just that, you know what
100%.
I mean? And I see it even, and I do want you to share, because I know you have a just like a very like experience within your family. But even in my family, I feel like I'll notice, up to this age, my mom and my father and their dynamic, these women, especially the women in the past, I feel like they didn't see there being a better option than to coddle to get by. And they
Mm-hmm.
don't realize, I guess, like the grave effect that they cause on the world when they act that way.
You,
You know
you're
what I
spot,
mean? Mm-hmm.
no, you're spot on because and someone said this to me the other day that the patriarchy is a joint venture,
It
right?
is. Mm-hmm.
Because this thing would not thrive by itself if women weren't there to co
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
and behave as co-architects, right? Because
Yep.
obviously, as you know, we have weaker bodies. We're not as strong as men. Um,
Mm-hmm.
we were under their power for so
Mm-hmm.
long, not having our rights and even just the means to work, right? Men controlled us in so many ways. And
Mm-hmm.
so women had to be co-opted. In fact, they had to buy in, even consciously, right? Because a lot of women actually buy into the patriarchy. They are into getting the so-called rewards that they're going to get when they
Yep.
participate. They're into
Mm-hmm.
treating other women just the way the patriarchy,
Mm-hmm.
demands that other women be shamed for not participating, right? So
Mm-hmm.
attaching yourself to a man, um,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's because women, and this is, I'm talking about Black women in particular, even African women, right? Is that like
Mm-hmm.
we're raised to not have any self-esteem. Like I said,
Yeah.
I grew up believing that something was wrong with me by virtue of being a girl. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's of not feeling worthy and enough was there, from the time I was very, very, very young. And so, can you imagine what happens to a girl who doesn't believe that outside of being attached or affiliated to a man, their life means nothing? And that's the messaging that girls are given growing up, right? Is that you don't have any inherent or intrinsic value. What you have to do to get the value is actually outsource it, right, to a male figure. So when girls are born, it's the father in in the family of origin. And then when the dad's done having his rule over you, well, he's going to transfer you now onto another man. Now, I don't think there's anything wrong with, I don't believe there's anything wrong with marriage and stuff like that. The problem comes in now where we don't make women believe or feel as if they are fundamentally human and have intrinsic value because they're made in the image of God, right? Instead, what we do is we chastise them for being born the way that they were, with being female and girls and women. And we say that you have to outsource your value. So things like marriage and even participating in the patriarchy become identity supplements, right? It's the way we supplement our identity. I need to get married at a particular age. I need to have children at a particular age. I need to be the good wife. I need to submit. I even need to endure a certain level of abuse to legitimize my role in this thing. And I think that's what's most dangerous about the system that we live in, right? Is that like women are expected to even prove in the marriages that they get, right, that they are worthy by enduring abuse. So enduring abuse now becomes the next level of proving your worth as a woman. I think that's what's the most harrowing and heartbreaking thing. I wanted to also, I think that's it. Yeah, I wanted to talk about the self-esteem that women are raised, that the low self-esteem that women are raised with, and how it makes a lot of sense that a lot of women actually end up buying into the patriarchies, because many of them just actually will never ever recover the sense that they are intrinsically valuable and human. Things like trauma bonds and the term intermittent reinforcement speak to the fact that, you know, abuse, when it's reinforced, creates less and less opportunities for the person who's being abused to desire leaving the abusive relationship. And so I think a lot of women are just caught up in reinforcing loops that bolster that sense of I am not enough and I'm worthy. Yeah, I think it makes total sense, you know, in terms of why women buy into the patriarchy. I think it's a means of survival, right? Because there's always a lot at play and at stake when a woman is depending on a man to validate her identity, her humanity, and even pay her way forward in life if she's unemployed or the man controls the financial world of the family that they live in. So yeah, women are co-architects with men in the patriarchy. And I think another thing that it's done is that women have also learned helplessness, and women have learned helplessness in the sense that a lot of women are perpetually glamorizing being infantilized, right? And so the new rhetoric on TikTok, for instance, is that, like, you know, when I'm with a man, I don't want to think and I don't want to do anything. I don't like, I want him to do everything. I think that's another ripple effect of the patriarchy, is that, like, we now glamorize being infantilized at the hands of a man. So, you know, women glamorize the fact that, you know, losing or suspending judgment, critical thought at the hands of a man is like sexy, which it really isn't, because I think women, because of how we're raised, we actually fear maturity. You know what I mean? And so we defer our power, we defer our agency to men, which is equally unhealthy. That's the other toxic side of it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
And I think really, okay, so my perspective on all of this too is that I feel like sometimes with the women, I feel like they do not truly understand the effects of what they do, if that makes any sense. I feel like they almost like downplay how much they participate in all this, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, and I think it's because of the threat. You know, there's always a threat of being punished in the patriarchy, right? And I think because the relationship is the relationship began from the time we came out of the womb, right? We don't have strategies of disrupting the pathology that we exist in, and so most women are just afraid
Uh-huh.
because a lot of women have seen
They're
the
afraid with the threat of violence. And I think I'm even experiencing that now a little, like even with my parents, like I said, because I feel like recently I've reached an age where I just like I don't allow a lot of things that I feel like when I was younger I would, because of what you're describing, like it's the threat of violence. Men as they get older, they do lose a little bit of that because they get older. So it's like you're not as scared. But I think that why did it have to come down to this? Why is it that it's almost like a tantrum, that you don't want to grow, you don't want to be better because you just feel like you can scare people? You know what I mean? And we're just supposed to put up with it. And I
Yeah.
think as women, the problem is that we do not help each other. We instead sell out to the enemy in order for us to be okay, not knowing that we're almost like signing our like own downfall eventually. Because
And I
this is the thing, like with women. And I think I also want to speak to a lot of young women. Like I think sometimes with women, especially if women have things that perhaps men value or put on a pedestal, which can be beauty, can be youth. I think
Mhm.
sometimes these women think that social capital is something that they should really take pride in, not knowing that they're basically creating monsters. You know what I mean?
Oh, 100%. And I think it's the illusion that there are benefits to buying into the patriarchy, right? Like, and because
Mhm,
they believe in it, they believe in the reward system of the patriarchy.
mhm.
And they too are too afraid
Yeah.
to imagine that there's a life outside of this thing. Because
Mhm,
we're raised, and when I think about the South African context, you need to understand, like, for my parents' generation and even my grandparents who grew up under a system
mhm.
where you had to be subjected to that level of dehumanization on a daily basis and still live your normal life, and the perpetrator never being held accountable,
Mhm.
families now become microcosms of the apartheid system.
Right.
Because
Right. That's what it is too. Like,
yes,
you know what I mean? And I think that's something people don't understand. It's like ultimately, I think what patriarchy is, and I described it in the second episode, it's really just a narc system. And a lot of the systems that
absolutely,
were under white supremacy, patriarchy, etc., they're just narcissistic systems that the biggest narc, the biggest psychopath, is the one who has the complete power. And then there's little like micro societies of that, kind of like you're saying, like the families become that.
100%. And most times when you have the raging knock,
Mm-hmm.
and they say if you grew up with two parents, uh,
Mm-hmm.
one was abusive, you grew up with two abusive parents.
Right.
Because the other one works to uphold the system. That's that,
Mm-hmm.
that is
Yeah, toddler. Mm-hmm.
exactly. You have the coddler, you have the enabler. You know
Mm-hmm.
what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And
Which is just as evil, you know what I mean? It's a manipulative.
100%, because they co-opted, right? And they're not abusing you as malignantly or as overtly as
Mm-hmm.
the knock is, but they are abusing you by enabling the
Yeah.
behavior and
Yeah.
remaining passive when the abuse is happening. So
Yeah.
so you're spot on, because that's what narcissistic um abuse and narcissistic family systems revolve around, right? It's like, especially within in the apartheid sense, right? Is that like your abuser, for
Mm-hmm.
instance, white man has the right to treat you how he wants on a daily basis.
Right.
So segregation laws,
Mm-hmm.
uh, the laws that existed during apartheid times,
Mm-hmm.
which cut black people off from feeling a sense of humanity, and
Mm-hmm.
then going through a process like, our first democratic elections, and having no real um projects or like social, political, anything address the horrors of apartheid. Our
Mm-hmm.
families have emulated the exact same system. Our families are microcosms of the apartheid state, where
Yeah.
one person is in charge and they have the right to do whatever they want to you.
Mm-hmm.
And just like they did it during apartheid, they were helpless and they just went along with the system,
Mm-hmm.
making sure they do not make the main knock angry,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So what
Mm-hmm.
mothers end up doing is that they train their children to
Mm-hmm.
tiptoe around, but they
Mm-hmm.
too also benefit because they abuse the children.
Yeah. I mean,
Now, when
that's exactly
in
what
the
the
patriarchy, it's
is.
because
Uh-huh.
they get to abuse the children. So the man abuses the woman,
Yeah.
right? And then she abuses the children, and that's how she co-opts the patriarchy. Is
Mm-hmm.
because children as an oppressed class also experience abuse at the hands of the mother, because by teaching children to tiptoe around the main knock, that is abuse.
Yeah. No, no, I
You
always
know,
we mentioned that in podcast, the second podcast, that we were saying that basically the children of these like narcissistic family dynamics either become one of two, they become a coddler also, or they become a narc. You know what I mean? Because of like
yep.
these family dynamics that like they either become like, oh, I have to be the most vicious, or I have to be like a submissive person that gets by. And that's the problem with the society that we have, because I would say 9 times out of 10, people fall into one of those two categories. Like even when you go to the workforce, it's either gonna be a coddler, the one that kisses up to the superior, or it's gonna be the vicious one. You know what I mean?
I'll add a third player. I'll add the scapegoat.
Oh, okay.
Be-
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the person
yes.
perhaps is, it can see through things, and they use that person
Yeah,
as
the
like
truth teller, the one who's going to say
the
F all this. And
Mhm.
that's the person that we're going to get rid of.
Mm. Yeah, and
That's,
they do. And it's
I mean,
crazy because you see this and I really think a lot of like what we're going through, like the society that we've built because of these systems that we're talking about, like patriarchy, white supremacy, all these very like narcissistic based systems, it's like it's bound to breed a very sickly society. It's either the people who are the perpetrators, like they're villainous, they're evil, and then it's the people who become the victims who go through all this trauma.
mhm.
And, we're never going to have like a healthy society with systems like this.
No, you're absolutely right, because yeah, it's just the power structure. And when, as a believer, Jesus was murdered because he
Mm-hmm.
because he
Yeah.
told the truth.
Mm-hmm.
He was murdered because he told the truth. He was telling people who he was. He was telling people that they were on the wrong path, the fact that they were doing things wrong for God, and
Mm-hmm.
right, and they got rid of him.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, yeah. Yeah, and
yeah,
I think that's the reason we've gotten to this point, because it's like that's been these people's strategy. I just think at this point, so many people are awakening that it's very hard for them to do that, like what you described. But in the past, that's definitely been their agenda. It's just like if someone goes against their system, they just go and get rid of that person.
exactly. But I think, I
Mhm.
mean, we're all here because of the scapegoats, right? The scapegoats are really keeping the conversation alive,
Mhm.
because even though they're usually gotten rid of it. And here's the thing about the system, right? A system
Mhm.
can never not breed a scapegoat or a truth teller.
Mhm. Okay.
The-
Mhm.
yeah, the system requires a scapegoat,
Wow.
because
Why do you say that?
yeah, because we need to put our shame somewhere. It has to go
Mhm.
somewhere.
Oh, so they project it onto that person.
So
That's
they
weird.
project onto the scapegoat. There's no system that will never not breed a scapegoat. The
Mm.
scapegoat is essential. I think this is what Carl Jung called the identified patient of the narcissistic family system, right? Is that like, first of all, the system in and of itself is bred by shame. It's informed. The foundation is shame, right? And
Mhm.
so we need a place to put this thing on, and
Mhm.
it's usually truth teller because they're more sensitive, and that's the thing. They're actually born to be pushed out of the system so they can speak back to it.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
understand?
Mhm.
They need to exist. But obviously, you and I know this, is that the world hates
Mhm.
truth tellers, but the world will never stop creating truth tellers as long as the narcissistic abuse continues, right? And so, um, look, I don't know, man.
I think no, and I think I think we're actually in very interesting times though, because I think in the past, kind of we were saying like the truth teller would be almost like a pariah. They would collectively look down on that person. I think we're
Mm,
honestly reaching to a point that everyone is just so fed up with everything that the truth teller
100%.
actually has a very interesting opportunity. I think secretly they're becoming like the new people everyone admires, if that makes any sense. Because I just
Yeah,
think the world has gotten so bad that the people are really thinking like, wow, is this really for the benefit of everyone? Because I think perhaps in the past they thought, and I know you see this even with like people who work in corporate or just like the general masses. I think they
mhm,
felt like they were benefiting enough that they could just keep their heads down and like
mhm.
follow along. But I think it's getting to the point that even they're getting so affected, they're getting like squeezed out the neck that they're like, whoa, maybe what I'm selling out to is not that good. You know what I mean?
Exactly. And I
Mhm.
think that might be the silver lining when it comes to what we're witnessing in the world, is that like people are being forced to think
Mhm.
about whether
Mhm.
anything we've ever prized to be uh important
Right.
actually actors, right? You look at
Mhm.
Hollywood. I mean, I'm in South Africa, but like I cannot tell
Mhm.
you the length to which my life has been impacted
Mhm.
by Hollywood, and by the
Right.
time I became a Christian, I was like in love with Mr. Big from Sex and the City. Okay. I'm from the trenches, darling. So you need to understand, like, that
Millennial. I feel like you guys are like the last generation that got like the,
yes.
the
Yeah,
fake propaganda.
exactly. But like so much of our ideals, even as African kids growing up, like post 90,
Mm.
were Americanized. We got all the
Mhm.
sitcoms, we watched like American families.
Mhm.
Uh, growing up on TV, right? And then we emulated that stuff. And now all the things that we believed we wanted to be, right? Rich,
Mhm.
successful, famous and stuff, we're actually going, oh wow, this is what it's taken for these people to be that successful. And look what they do behind closed doors. Is
Yeah.
it really worth it? And the answer is a unanimous no. So
Yeah.
I'm glad that there's a way in which there's a uniform morality that
Mhm.
everyone clearly has. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's the silver lining in everything that's happening right now.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because I have like, and I mentioned this too with Dante. I have worked with people in the entertainment industry before. I think that
Mhm.
in the industry is very fascinating to me because I think that a lot of the times, a lot of these people go in very young. You know what I mean? They go in misguided by their family because I think, and it's not just that industry. I think everyone who's young, because we live in this narcissistic web that we've described. I feel like the parents do not inculcate in their kids that almost like going after your dreams should not be through your ego, if that makes any sense. It should be through like you're almost like investing in a collective philanthropic task. But I feel
Yeah.
like parents almost promote narcissism in their kids when it comes to like whatever even career that they invest in. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it's just easier, to do
Okay.
that because nothing's harder than
Mm-hmm.
than 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 bearing witness to yourself as a human being. I think it was Plato, the
Okay.
who said the examined life is not worth living, right? And I think the
Mhm.
more privileged you are in the world, the less requirements there are on you to actually develop an internal life, an inner life.
Yeah.
In like, I mean, the white man
Mm-hmm.
as as a figure in the world
Yeah.
does not have to be a human being. He's white and he's male, right?
Mm-hmm. No,
Why?
and I
Why?
think, and I think also for them, kind of like you were saying, how that concept of like I guess like the exam life is not worth it. I think that comes from a place of like, I think in life the stuff that really matters at the end really does come from a place of uncomfort and like hard work. And
Mhm.
I think that that has never been understood by the general public. I think it's always like you want to seek things that are almost like a band-aid to your happiness.
Yeah, I mean, look at the most interesting people in the world generally. The most interesting people in the world are people who come from nothing, people from the gutter. You know what I mean? It's
Hmm.
it's it's always the people who had nothing and who worked their way to the top that kind
Right.
of the writers and the greatest poets in the world. It was the
Hmm.
saddest people, it was the poorest people, it was
Hmm.
the darkest people,
Yeah.
it was women, right?
Yeah.
Because when you don't have any privilege in the world, you have to go inside.
Mm.
Because you have to study your oppressor because you
Mhm.
have to survive him. And I think what men don't also understand is that we know them so well because we live to survive them
Yeah.
every single day. And so I have to, the same way Black people know white people. You
Mhm.
know, nobody knows a white person like a Black person
Mhm.
because our
Mhm.
whole life revolved around surviving them,
Mhm.
right?
And
Same
I
thing with
that I feel like they don't examine others in that same way because they don't think that the other person
there's no
is worthy
incentive.
of that level of examination.
Exactly. That level of like you said, self-examination,
Mhm.
introspection,
Mhm.
scrutiny, you
Mhm.
know, to see yourself for what you are is one of the most excruciating things I've ever done, and I'm
Mhm.
still in the process. But like I said, I think, I had to develop an inner life because I've got almost no privilege. Like I said, I'm a middle child. I'm a dark-skinned Black woman. I
Mhm.
used to be fat. I mean, the only thing left for me to be, honestly, is gay right now. So that's just to round, my issue.
Mhm. Yeah.
But I have all the things that I've never had, like any privilege that could insulate me from the horrors of the
Mm.
world or
Yeah.
history, so to
Mm.
speak. And so my rich inner life comes from the fact that I've been quite marginalized as a body. I'll say as a body in the world, right? The world doesn't like women. It doesn't like Black people. It doesn't like articulate women, eloquent women. You know what I mean? But
Yeah.
it, like I said, it's so funny that it's the exclusion and the marginalization that forces the truth teller to speak back to the system. That's the
Yeah.
irony of it, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
they like build diamonds under that level of pressure.
exactly. But it's hard,
Yeah.
you
But
know.
I
And
think what makes me sad though, it's like kind of what you're describing about like, you were almost forced to like create that rich inner world. Why do you
yeah,
think most humans like they run away from that? I don't get that because I really think that even like me, trying to I guess like have this as a business, I think it's been very difficult to like have people understand the importance of these things. You know what I mean? I think they think that it's almost like they are a chocolate ball and they're okay with being hollow and not knowing that that's literally the biggest bliss of life, and I think that would include men, you know what I mean? They really think that the
yeah.
way that's really why they keep the patriarchy going because they think like we're living like kings, there cannot be anything better because we have this infinite physically speaking, when they don't get that the real richness and happiness comes from this inner self-discovery that they should be doing.
I think that people in general and men in particular avoid
Mm-hmm.
looking at themselves is because I believe that all human beings are aware that
Mm-hmm.
they are ashamed.
Mm-hmm.
I,
Isn't that so
I,
sad? Mm-hmm.
I
But
think
I'm
human
basically saying like they're aware that they've done stuff that they shouldn't have.
absolutely,
Mhm,
and
mhm,
they've done it to themselves.
mm,
That's too hard to face, and I think I think it sounds simple, but it's still true. I love
mm,
there's Jordan Peterson wrote a book called 12 Rules for Life, and I bought this book 3 years ago. I haven't moved past the second rule, right? The second
right.
rule is to treat yourself like someone you are responsible
Mm,
of taking care of. And I
mhm,
love that rule because in that chapter, he exposits Genesis chapter 3, and he also makes the case that human
mhm,
beings are fundamentally plagued by shame. And the
mhm,
reason why it's hard for us to love ourselves is because we're plagued by shame. He
mhm,
also traces it back to the Genesis story because he says he says, even if you look at our physicality, right? Like animals don't wear any clothing, and
mhm,
they have physiques that actually hide their most sensitive and most intimate parts, as
mhm,
opposed to human beings who, stand upright and have our parts protruding naturally, right? And
mhm,
and he
mhm,
analyzed the role of clothing, but and the reason, and so he's saying basically that human beings are just too afraid to work with themselves despite their shame.
mhm,
Human beings actually don't know that God still wants us despite our shame, and that there is still a way forward with God in this instance, despite our shame.
mhm,
And I would tell you as a Christian that Jesus Christ removes our shame because
right.
he has done what is necessary to atone for the sin of the world, and so now we go to God freely, right? But
Mhm,
when you don't enter that dimension, you are still living in that first birth, living with that intrinsic inherent shame that all human beings are born with. And I think that's the main reason. It's shame. Shame runs us all, and shame breeds pride, and shame breeds control and fear.
mhm,
With there's shame, there's pride, control, and fear. Even women, I think women's shame shows up in covert narcissism and low self-esteem, right?
yeah.
Because the covert narcissist and the overt narcissist are two sides of the same coin. Uh,
Mhm,
Pride will either look grandiose, present itself as grandiose, or
right.
present itself as self-effacing and
Mhm,
basing and self-deprecating. But
mhm,
in both instances, the gaze is still me. Even when you have low self-esteem, a lot of shame, you
mhm,
know, everything is just about me. I'm pitiful, I'm ugly, I'm unworthy. That's still pride
mhm,
because the focus is on you. That's
mhm,
why humility is an accurate view of yourself. And so
mhm,
Jordan Peterson would say this in rule 2, right? That to be humble is to say, despite the fact that I'm a fallen human being, I'm
mhm,
still made in the image of God, therefore I can still move forward. But
Mm,
what humans would rather do is create systems where they can be in control as a means of defending themselves from that shame, which
mm,
we actually have the opportunity to confront with
mhm,
a God in this instance who is still eager to connect with us and take away the shame. That's what human beings don't want to come into contact with. It's the fact that your shame can be taken away. But we
mm,
know that it's too hard because it takes incredible maturity and courage to see yourself as a human being, fragile, fundamentally fragile, right?
mhm.
Fundamentally vulnerable, susceptible, but also just so lovable. You
Mm,
know, I think that's where our obsession with control and perfectionism come from,
yeah.
um,
Yeah,
which
because I
is
always would feel that's very bizarre. Like I feel like kind of what you're saying because people like they need a lot of work like spiritually or just internally speaking. I feel like they try to overcompensate with their physicality. Like that's why they want to be super rich. They want to be very attractive. You know what I mean? It's like it's all coming from a place of you want to overcompensate the fact that you have these like, uncomfortable feelings.
it's fig leaves to me.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
All human beings do is project huge fig leaves. It's a projection. You know what
Mm-hmm.
I'm saying? I don't want you to see me
Mm-hmm.
as I am.
Mm, okay.
Adam and Eve didn't realize they were naked and ran straight to God. They
Mm-hmm.
took matters in their own hands, which is religion, like I said.
Mm-hmm.
It's a shame management project. And so the things that we do is the way that we manage our shame. We
Okay.
become rich, we become skinny, we bleach
Mm-hmm.
the skin, we attach ourselves to men, we
Mm,
make ourselves sexually viable. That is shame management.
right.
Yeah.
And I think my curiosity, like now that because all this is facts, like all this we're seeing it play out right now in society. And I think like as someone like, and I don't know if Dante can agree with this, but I feel like as someone who works in this field, how can we make it so it's more like widely acceptable or just like people become more aware that in those areas that they seek like to like almost like refuge in, that's not the answer and that they really do need to do that work that's uncomfortable because I think the problem with our society is that we've reached the peak of that. We've reached the peak of what you're saying that people run and refuge themselves in physicality, and that's
Mm.
why we're having climate disaster. That's why we're having like these files that just got released. That's why we're having like these leaders. You know what I mean? Like we're reaching the peak of people like seeking in that direction. That's ultimately leading to like globally speaking catastrophe. Like how can we make it so that humans realize the importance of them delving inside of themselves and working on themselves?
Oh,
You know what I mean? Because I think that's really, because, when people say, like, in my opinion, because I know I respect everyone's perspective, get they're always like, oh, there's going to be an awakening, a great awakening. I'm like, I feel like the great awakening is like a collectively, everyone realizes that we can no longer move in this direction. Therefore, we're going to have to do what we've always refused to do in order to really progress in the correct direction. Do you know what I'm saying?
100%. I just think I think a new way of life has to be
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just
introduced.
unsustainable. You know what I mean? Like it's like even if
Yeah,
people want to, it's gonna crash. It's just like nature's gonna force them. And but my thing is, it's like, why is it that people have to reach rock bottom to like understand that that way was never gonna be sustainable?
oh, I think people are just more attached to the illusion.
Mm-hmm.
I think fear is powerful, uh,
Mm-hmm.
potent,
Mm-hmm.
and too many people. Remember Neo in The Matrix?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
How when he was chosen, he
Mm-hmm.
remember how he was like disconnected from that egg bubble thing. Like he wasn't like it's like his consciousness was kept in this egg bubble thing, and
Right.
then the
Mm-hmm.
camera showed you like how they disconnected him from that thing, and then when it panned out, it was like an eternal row of those bubble egg contraptions that like
Mm-hmm.
he I think that that represents the fact that human beings' consciences are kind of fundamentally programmed, right? And most
Mm-hmm.
people live in a conscious state
Yeah.
that is imprisoned.
Yeah.
And on a
Mhm.
spiritual level, I feel like not everyone is going to come because not everyone is supposed to come.
Mm.
And so I think there's a demographic that I believe are just going to have that they're just not coming. Like,
Yeah. No, and I agree. I think like that's a realistic perspective, but I think more so like those people who are on that edge and they do have the capacity to like, go in the right direction. How do you think like I guess like for the people who do are a little bit more aware, how do we get those people on board?
mm,
Because I really think like everything that we're talking about, that's gonna be like the new direction. Like that's why right now everything feels so heavy and dark because it's like it's in that rotting process. You know what I mean? That like something new has to like be born from that. And I think like a lot of people, and I think that's why a lot of the old propaganda that was used, because I think perhaps in the past, people have tried to move it in that direction. People being someone like what you've mentioned, like Jesus Christ. But I
mm,
think that we're getting to the point that like even if these people don't want to, like it's like life, the universe, energy, and just nature is gonna force them. Do you see what I'm saying?
100%. But I think like humanity in general just needs to go back and ask itself, like, why are we here? People
Mhm.
people need meaning.
Yeah. Yeah, and
People
I
need
feel like they don't
meaning.
they don't value that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But now it's becoming so obvious that they do.
But like, especially with like a universe like
Hmm.
Hollywood coming apart, right? And
Yeah,
everything that Hollywood has represented,
yeah.
riches,
Those are
fame,
refuge. Hmm.
success. We're
Yeah,
seeing now what people have had to do to project that image onto us. Now
right.
that makes people think that
Mm.
if I'm surprised to have riches,
Hmm.
what else am I leaning on as a mean making mechanism for my life? I'm a believer, right? Like I
Hmm.
believe Jesus died for me. And so my life has meaning
Hmm.
because I understand that there's so much more to life than just having a house and a car. My life
Hmm.
has a meaning today because I know that I'm made in God's image, and my life has meaning even in eternity because
Hmm.
I believe in life after death. And so
Right.
my life is kind of contained and even more bearable. My
Hmm.
life is bearable because my life now has meaning and purpose,
Hmm.
right? And I think maybe there's a conversation we could now start to have around what do human beings actually need? And are you actually interested in my context, right? Of
Right.
actually finding out from the creator the reason why you are here on this earth. Because I people need identity, meaning, and purpose. And any conversation that does not factor that into the conversation, I think is futile
Hmm.
because we're here because people have not made having meaning and purpose in life fashionable,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Or we've made
I think
something
they
as
make it's something that they don't need. And I think that's something humans have so wrong. You know what I mean? I think they don't understand that we're humans, we're not animals. Like unlike animals, we actually need stuff that's like almost like outside of us to be like have like a sense of purpose, a sense of like why are we doing what we're doing. And I think
100%.
only animals need those basic survival things that I think sadly the world has made us all believe that that's what we need in excess.
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite scriptures says, don't worry about what you're gonna eat or drink.
Mm-hmm.
Like God takes care of the birds and the flowers. They don't work, but He
Mhm,
feeds. So how much more will God provide for human beings, right? Seek
mhm,
God's kingdom and His righteousness, and all these other things will be added onto you. So
right.
my life is based on enacting and working out another type of humanity that
Mhm,
I glean from, like Jesus Christ. Life becomes an adventure,
mm,
right? Because all of a sudden have God like literally
mhm,
direct your life. And so all of the things that lead into your purpose,
mhm,
easy to do. And then God just adds the other stuff. I mean, come on, you can't tell me that like we're on earth to buy a big house and drive a
mhm.
nice car. I mean, like that
It's
cannot be what it's about.
mhm, mhm.
You
And
know
I
what I
think
mean?
that's too, no, no, exact. I think what you're saying is like facts. I think too, like with that being said, I feel like with even the patriarchy, the irony of what everything that we're talking about, it's that the patriarchy created a society that at the end is very hollow. Like it's almost like
It's completely
you know,
empty.
not allowing us to embrace that aspect that you're speaking of. It's almost erased that, if that makes any sense. That's why everything like People always say like, oh, everything feels so weird, so bizarre. Like I don't feel purpose anymore, or there's no more creativity anymore. It's like because we've created a hollow world, you know what I mean? Thanks to
Yeah,
the systems of control.
absolutely. There's no purpose and there's no meaning. Everything is entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is so light. Everything is social media. It's
Mm-hmm.
just also it's just boring. And I
Yeah.
think I had the hardest time kind of like even in my faith when I didn't fully understand it. I had a hard time with life because I'm not materialistic, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I had a hard time adjusting to life because I was like, I don't care about the house. I
Mm-hmm.
don't care about the car. So life also became hard for me to live because I don't aspire to those things.
Mm-hmm. Then
I
what
had,
do you do? Mm-hmm.
yeah, I had to find meaning.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
what is my life? Why am I here?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, my mom had me 12 years after my sister. So I'm like, oh my gosh, I was literally almost never here.
Mm-hmm.
But I still made it here. So my life is about living out the reason why I'm here. And only God has that script.
Mm-hmm.
Every human being needs to go to God and be like, can you tell me why I'm here
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
what I'm here to do? And then he gives you the assignment and then life becomes an adventure.
Yeah. None of
Yeah.
life is like full, you know what I mean? I think that's what's so sad. I think that idea, and I think it's again like what I'm saying, I think only people who have reached those pinnacles of like the physical world can understand. But I feel like that's never going to give you that satisfaction that you really need to live like a fulfilling life. And I think it's so sad because since those people are
Yeah.
so influential, they're spreading that agenda to even the people who aren't in that level of privilege or in that level of access, and they start thinking that way, you know what I mean? When I feel like every human should seek to really have like a rich life, kind of like what you described.
Yeah, I remember reading an academic paper when I was in university called the
Mm-hmm.
it was called the uses of poverty, where
Uh-huh.
it basically outlined how poverty is a resource, right? And that rich people, powerful people use. I'm just thinking about poor people in the world. There's nothing more important than impoverished people in the world um,
Mm-hmm.
money. You know what I mean? Like you can't tell impoverished people that you need purpose and meaning in their life. So I think poverty just becomes another stumbling block, another
Yeah.
obstacle
Yeah. But
basically
I
for
think
what
that's
people are
the
trying to do. Yeah,
indirect problem. Sorry for cutting you off. That's like the indirect problem these people have created. You know?
exactly.
Mm-hmm. Like keeping so many people in that. I was even mentioning in another episode in like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like they keep them at
Mhm.
that very bottom, that they're not even thinking that at that
Exactly.
point it's like you're creating diseased people. And I think you even see it even
Exactly.
like, I guess if you want to go back to that industry like Hollywood, like there's some
Mhm.
people, there's few people like they come from like, you know what I mean? They don't come from money. So that becomes like their like ultimate desire is to like reach physically, not knowing that like that's they get to a point that like that's what people describe as selling their souls because they no longer really have time or like they don't see the importance of developing themselves internally speaking.
Yeah. And that's the like you said, right? So you keep people surviving.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You just keep people surviving because there's no time to think about self-actualization, which is
Yeah.
level 5, I think, of Maslow's hierarchy, right? Like there's
Mm-hmm.
no time to think about self-actualization where you don't know what you're going to have to eat tonight.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So poverty is still such a major obstacle to most people even waking up to the world that we're living in, right? People need to
Mm-hmm.
eat every single day.
Yeah.
And I hate that.
Yeah. And I think the saddest thing is that like there's people who have a different problem. Like they manage, people of color, they manage to get out of that, but they keep that poverty mindset. They don't use their privilege to then work onto that next level, if that makes any sense, of internally develop.
100%. I think conditioning is powerful, and not everyone's coming out of conditioning. I think what's cool about our conversation, and I
Mm-hmm.
think what people take for granted in general, is the
Mm-hmm.
fact that being woke, so to speak, is also a privilege.
Yes. It,
You know,
it is. It is.
it's,
And it
we're
shouldn't be,
not,
but it is.
no, we're
So like what
not
you
supposed
said, most people, like they're gonna always be in that very lower level of primal
to.
survival.
A lot
Mm-hmm.
of us walking dead people.
Mm-hmm.
So like let's never take for granted the fact uh that we're aware, that our eyes
Right.
are open. That's why I
Right.
referenced Neo in the Matrix, because Neo was just also living his life, but they found him.
Mm-hmm.
You know, even he had to be awakened to the truth of who he was.
Right.
Not everyone is Neo, as we all know this. Most people are just zombies.
Right.
Most people are dead,
Yeah. Yeah, they
you
are.
know.
And you see it, when you leave your home, you just see everyone's in a state of despair. And I think it's almost like it is a spiritual, like kind of like we were saying, even like if we go past the physicality, the finances, I feel like you see this across all income levels. And I think that just speaks to like the rotting nature of the systems that we've been under, that they've sucked the life out of everyone.
Mm, mm, mm.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Hmm.
I know this. I know this too well.
Hmm.
Uh, and just like it's like a reverberating pain, the despair and the helplessness in the world right now. Like I said, I think um one of the most famous scriptures in the world is John 3 verse 16, right? That like
Hmm.
God so loved the world that he gave his one and only son. But like the because this that scripture was written in Greek, and the word that is used for world
Hmm.
is cosmos, right? Like where we
Yeah.
get like cosmological or cosmogony, is that like God has made a plan to save the actual cosmos, like the order of the world that
Hmm.
is by demonic forces, that is run
Hmm.
by evil people.
Hmm.
Those people are given like the opportunity to come back to God. And I think in my context as a believer, I'm like, I don't see any other way out other than reconnection with the creator, because
Yeah.
I don't think
Mhm.
life has meaning outside of not knowing your creator. You know
Yeah.
what
And I
I
think
mean?
that's the problem
I'm
though.
quite bored by life. I don't find life to be exciting. Not really, I must say. I'm also quite a depressive, like I'm a very melancholic person in general. So I'm
Okay.
not having a wonderful time. But my life has meaning. That's why I'm still here,
Yeah.
you
No,
know?
I think that's what's sad though. I think kind of what you're saying, the reason everyone feels the way that, you've just described, I think is we've been disconnected from the source.
Yeah.
I mean, and we've been disconnected by the most unwise and lost people. You know what I mean?
Mm, mm, mm.
Mhm. But I don't think
Lord
that's
God
not.
have mercy.
I mean, we should all have a lust for life, and we don't.
And we don't.
Hmm.
Like I feel like it's also just too simple. The more I think about it, and I'm like, there's just no way I'm here to work so that I can buy a house and buy a car and have kids
No.
and
Mm-mm.
die. There's just no way.
Mm. Yeah,
You know,
I just think that was a very like uncreative form of organization from like these very lost people that they've almost like they push that upon everyone. I think that's the saddest thing, but I think the sad thing is that everyone in a way is guilty of complying.
100%. And I mean, so was I back in my days when I was out here being a pick me. But I was raised that way, right? Like
Hmm.
we're all conditioned to think this way. And the
Hmm.
fact that we are coming out of it and are out of it is the miracle in and of itself.
Right.
I think it's
Hmm.
amazing that we know what we know and can see what we see. Most people can't. We are a minority in the world right now.
But I
You know?
think what I said, I think we are a minority, but I do feel like we're a growing minority because I will say in the past, I don't think I've ever experienced being able to talk about all these things. And I feel like even with TikTok, you just see so many more people being forced to like see the realities of the world that it does give you hope that maybe there is going to be like a light at the end of the tunnel and people will become more aware as to why they shouldn't be living in this way.
Yeah. No, I definitely have hope.
Me too. And I think no one should lose hope. I think the hope is the
Yeah.
last thing
No,
that
we're
should
not losing hope. We can't afford
die.
to
Hmm.
lose hope. But yeah, it's been it's been tough.
Mm.
Yeah.
But yes, Gabaza, I think that concludes our talk for today. But this was excellent. I love that you were able to intertwine both your religious understanding of the world as well as just your experience, sadly, with the patriarchy. I don't know. Do you
Mm.
have any closing remarks? I don't know for either me or Dante. Like any questions that you may have, or how you
Uh,
feel. Anything.
no, I feel great. And like I said again, thank you so much for the platform. I mean, the way Immateria and I like met on TikTok is just crazy. Like I'd been watching him and then he saw something and he liked it. And what I mean? It was just like it's crazy. So the fact that we're even doing this is like amazing.
Excellent.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you
Uh-huh.
so much.
No,
I haven't
go
no,
ahead.
I feel like we're all on the same page. I don't really have a question that I can think of
No, I
right
was gonna
now.
say, similar to you, I am so happy that Materia got on TikTok because it's very rare to meet people who are legit, and he was very honest and legit, and I like how sincere he is. So I'm happy
Yeah,
that he was able to connect, me to you as well, because
me
it's very nice.
too.
I think that this is what we need. Like, I think all the people who are more aware, they need to find a way to connect, because I really think that this is something, I don't think one person should nor can fix all of this. I think we need like a collective to be able to like move society in like the right direction.
100%. In fact,
Mhm.
I might have a question for Immateria, which would be like,
Mhm.
what do you think the number of men wanting to come out of the patriarchy is increasing or no? And what do you think the chances are actually?
That's a good question. Mhm.
Mm, do I think it's increasing?
Yeah.
I couldn't speak for that, to be honest, because
Mm,
I genuinely don't know. But I will say that the number of men, honestly, I don't know. I don't feel like I'm educated enough to answer either one of these questions.
okay.
I think she was just saying like based on, because you work a little bit in this, like based on your observation, like even like I guess comments on your TikTok.
Yeah, like do you have a lot of men reaching out to you and be like, yo, bro, I just came across your stuff, please help?
Mhm.
Or are the numbers quite sparse, kind of like here and there? I just want to know like the level of male engagement, just even with your stuff on TikTok.
I do get male engagement like a lot more than I expected, to be honest. It's mostly female engagement, like maybe like
Okay.
60-40.
Okay,
That's
so it's
so
still
good.
predominantly women.
Sorry, say that one more time.
I said, so it's still predominantly women.
Predominantly, yeah. A
Yeah.
lot more, just in general, a lot more women have a lot more self-awareness.
Okay.
The men though, I've had a couple men, a lot of men coming about like, either they're like, bro, I totally get this. This is exactly what I do with my wife. So those men exist.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's also guys that are like, dude, I love this girl, but like I have all these tendencies. How do I do
Mm.
something about that?
Mm,
And the last one I've seen is just like guys who were just like kind of like in a rough spot and they're just like lost as hell.
Mm.
So I really don't know because like I feel like I'm kind of like insulated. I don't really get too much outside of my bubble, outside of my niche.
mm,
The last I don't know, like I feel like I have like a short experience on that. I think for me personally, I think they are seeking out. I think they've reached their breaking point. And I'm just talking about even like my immediate circle of like men that I know. I feel like they all are coming to that realization that they can't live like that no more.
oh, well, that's good to hear.
So I do think there's a light at the end of the tunnel. It's just very hard. I guess they really have
Mm.
to reach that rock bottom, but they're reaching it.
Well, I look, I hope so.
Me too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. But yes, guys, thank you for joining me. This was amazing, and I'm looking forward to our next episode, which will be covering the patriarchy and reference to capitalism. So thank you for everyone joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, goodbye.
Bye bye.